So after this, Robert Fripp is sick of the music industry, and he goes and joins a monastery for a while. He gets away from the music business, and he finds his inner peace. He's probably meditating a lot and just kind of soaking in his experience and figuring out what's next. And in the late 70s, he moves to New York. He leaves the monastery, moves to New York. Suddenly, he's getting a call from David Bowie and Brian Eno, and he's appearing on the Heroes record. He's producing Peter Gabriel too. He's producing Daryl Hall in the Sacred Songs record. He's involved with Debbie Harry as a musician and otherwise. I think briefly. Here's what I learned today is they nearly starred in a remake of Jean-Luc Godard's Alphaville, which is one of my favorite films. But there was nearly a version with Debbie Harry and Robert Fripp as the lead characters. So this is a time, the 7-year gap between King Crimson records is a time for exploration and discovery. And, you know, Robert is jumping in with both of his feet into a new experience and, you know, learning from the new wave. You know, he's going out and seeing the Ramones live and doing something completely different than what you'd expect. And in this time, he makes Exposure, which we won't be ranking. But I just wanted to mention that that's one of my favorite Robert Fripp albums. And it is at an interesting point in the King Crimson canon to me because it is kind of the bridge between Discipline and Red. But he calls this the drive to 1981. And there's one band there, the League of Gentlemen, that comes back with a new lineup, a new mission statement. And aside from doing some Frippertronics, which is a playback of loops that he solos over top of, he's not really involved as the band leader, but slowly Fripp begins to realize, oh, wait, I'm back in the music business after all. It crept up on me. And this leads to the formation of the 1980s King Crimson lineup with Adrian Belew, Bill Bruford comes back, and Tony Levin on bass. Robert Fripp said that Tony Levin is the best bass player he's ever worked with. Sorry, John. Sorry, Greg. Tony Levin is top of the heap. And they auditioned many bass players. But from what I understand, Tony Levin was the one that they didn't have to explain anything to. He was just able to figure it out on his own. They knew he was the guy. He was the one to work with. So initially the group is called Discipline. And there's a lot of pressure, partially from the record company, but also from a lot of Robert's friends. Probably most notably, Brian Ferry of the band Roxy Music was saying, "Hey, Robert, why don't you call that thing King Crimson? Isn't this kind of King Crimson?" It was a case of where Fripp wanted to get Discipline on the road and to test it in front of an audience. And following that show at the Moles Club, I think he fully embraced, that this is King Crimson. And suddenly their earnings doubled because there's this name recognition and the power of name recognition. And there's so much interest in the band. And there's a bit of a zeitgeist happening that's similar to 1969 King Crimson. So the resulting album is Discipline. And I don't have a single copy of Discipline. I have the box set. Mike's got two. I'm going to be kind of holding up the box set and just talking about the 80s albums in general.
Discipline is never an end in itself, only a means to an end. That's the quote on the back of the album, which is great. Discipline rules. This Discipline is yet another Crimson album that was a favorite of my number one at one point. Shows how much I love the band, I guess, and how that I keep flip-flopping these damn things in my life. Discipline's great. It really is one of those albums that kind of changed music again. And also not just like the Crimson sound, but Discipline changed music in general. Like there's a way more of a world music, quote unquote, influence. Not a great term, world music, but there's a lot of gamelan influence. There's a lot of African music influence. And the big thing that they did was add interlocking guitar parts between Adrian and Robert Fripp. And that stuff is really, it's new, it's exciting, it's something completely different, and it's fantastic. Plus you have Bill Bruford and Tony Levin behind them, which is a monstrous rhythm section. And like the four of them really did create something brand new with this album, and with the 80s Crimson in general. It's a rather special time for sure. I think as a objective, I think my brain stopped working for a minute. Let me try again. For me, in my personal life, I might have played Discipline too much, because it went down a bit in my ranking, as I'll show you later, everybody. But I do still love it. It's just I like a little other ones better. I think it's a masterpiece. What really I gravitate to most is Mate Kudasai, which is the best Crimson ballad. It is a drop dead gorgeous song. The Sheltering Sky, which is very improvisational based, and it's gorgeous. And the title track. The title track is one of those rare songs that every time you listen to it, you find something new. I kind of get lost in it. It really, like, look at this, the inner knot. Discipline, the song, is this for me. It's like a constant, like, weaving of stuff. And the way that they made that through only music is something really special. Like, how on earth did they do that? It's awesome. It's awesome.
Yeah. This to me is the one King Crimson album that sounds like it could have been made tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's totally timeless, and it doesn't sound like it's 40 years old to me. In fact, I think that it's aged better than some of the later King Crimson records have. I love this album, and you can tell from my shirt. Maybe it's kind of a spoiler as to where my ranking might end up, but. This is an all killer, no filler album. To me, it's King Crimson developing a new vocabulary, a vocabulary that's entirely their own, and it's entirely in the what we were talking about, the mission statement of everyone is in service of the music. The music is the front person. I think that is very much exemplified by the Discipline record, especially that mission statement. Talking about favorite songs, I think that Frame by Frame is hard to beat. If I was going to pick a song for my King Crimson compilation from this album, it would be hard to pick one over that one. I mean, Elephant Talk is, what can be said about Elephant Talk? It's instantly recognizable. There's something about Adrian Belew's delivery of the lyrics that it just grabs me, like it grabs my attention, but then the music has this like calming effect on my brain, and I don't know how to explain it, but it's like this meditative effect. And you hear this especially on the last two tracks, The Sheltering Sky and Discipline. But no, there's nothing on this album that I don't like. I mean, if I were going to point to something, maybe Thela Hun Jinjit is my least favorite song.
Me too.
But I love the abandon of In Discipline. And I think of all of King Crimson's lyrics, the I repeat myself when under stress lyric is the one that comes through my mind absolutely the most. Before any other song, I probably think of that one. So yeah, this is peak to me. And one thing that I would say, I mean, we'll get to the ranking, but one thing that this album has maybe that I like about it over some of the others is that I can't just play Lark's Tongues and Aspic and go for a drive. I can't just play Court of the Crimson King and, clean the house or something. When I listen to these records, I need to sit down and absorb them and let them wash over me and have an experience with them. And I'm not saying that Discipline doesn't contain that as well, but there's an air about Discipline that maybe this is why you burned out on it. It's because it's replayable. You can just listen to it again and again and again, and you can tune in and listen to it closely and get one level out of it, or you can kind of put it on the background and it's still enjoyable, or you can go for a drive with it and it's still enjoyable. And there's not many King Crimson records that go down quite that well for me. So this is an undisputed favorite for me. This is a stable lineup. And
yes, this is
let me interject
stable. Yeah,
real quick and say that the reason for that is because Robert Fripp had a plan. This amount of albums in this amount of time, we're going to take 6 months on, 6 months off, and in 3 month intervals. So this was all like, let's stick to this lineup and make 3 records.
This is the stable lineup era for King Crimson. The only one in the entire existence of the band, which is pretty nuts if you think about it. So they made, after Discipline, King Crimson hit the road, and then they were off for 6 months, and they recorded another album. And this album is the one called Beat. In my opinion, this album is probably the most underrated in the whole catalog. I think this album's great. On this album, they took all of the interlocking complexity of the first album of this band, Discipline, and they added even more pop sensibility with it. It's a perfect marriage, I think, of pop tunes and complex in-your-face music. It's great. It also sounds really good. The production on this album is fantastic. It's one that I think I like more and more every time I listen to it. And it has Waiting Man, which is one time, I still might be my favorite King Crimson song, period. I love Waiting Man. Just something about it, just like, it's arresting for me. That groove is just the best thing ever. And I love everything on this album pretty much, really. Heartbeat is a great song. Some people hate that song, but I think it's a perfect pop song. It's terrific. This stuff fits well in the King Crimson canon. It's not out of line to have some pop tunes in there. It fits well.
No.
It fits.
I mean, I Talk to the Wind is a pop song.
Yeah, exactly.
Half of Giles and Fripp is pop tunes.
Music. Yeah. It's been in the DNA forever. Waiting Man is probably my favorite King Crimson song. There's just something about it I love to pieces. It's just that groove is arresting. It's really a beautiful piece of music. I really like Heartbeat. It's a great pop song. Neil Jack and Me is a fun opener. I really also like Two Hands, The Howler, and Requiem, especially Requiem, the long version, because Bruford does some really unbelievable stuff in that too.
Oh yeah, that's an example of what is known as applied Frippertronics.
Yeah,
because that's an improv, a Frippertronics loop that was from like 77, 79, somewhere in there.
Yeah,
he played back and they improvised around. That's where the tension really started to happen within this band, interpersonally. With at one point Adrian Belew asking Robert to leave.
Oh my God.
And he disappeared for like 3 days, and they were finally able to coax him back, like a shy cat. But it was like this album was the first rift within the 80s King Crimson. This is where the cracks within the relationships started to form. But the thing is, I don't think it shows within the material that much.
No.
And you really can't tell. And there is something to be said that, for the more turbulent King Crimson is behind the scenes, sometimes that makes the music better. Not always, but sometimes it has a positive effect. But I was going to point to the song Neil and Jack and Me as a song that never leaves my brain. What is it? Strange Spaghetti in the Silent City, or whatever it is.
Though the Beat Poet references are great. It's like an homage to Jack Kerouac and all those guys. Yeah, and it's like, and it's also like a cultural shift for King Crimson, because they're obviously very British, at least historically are, but at this point in the band we have 2 Americans, so for Adrian Belew to be singing about Studebakers and all these, very American iconic imagery, it fits this era of the band really well. And I love this album. It's not my favorite album of the 80s. In fact, it might be, it's always between this one and Three of a Perfect Pair, because they're similar. Like this one and Three of a Perfect Pair are both an attempt at a shaky marriage of the straightforward pop writing that Adrian Belew brought to the band, and the experimentation
the weird stuff, because Neurotica is insane.
Neurotica's awesome. Yeah.
That's a crazy, insane piece. And I also love The Howler.
Yeah.
That's another track that I think is the return of the menacing King Crimson. Sartorian Tangier is one of the band's best instrumentals, with Tony Levin's stick playing really at the forefront of this track. Like you, I also adore Waiting Man, particularly the live versions that just kind of unfold. There's something that whenever this band plays, it captivates me, and I cannot, like if I'm watching them, I can't look away. They just, and before I know it, a whole hour has passed and I'm still watching this performance unfold. So yeah, there's magic. There's magic in Beat. So Three of a Perfect Pair. This is the final effort of the 80s trilogy, and its title is a reflection of those three albums. They're Three of a Perfect Pair. It's a description of those three albums as a piece, which I really like. But there's also this dysfunctional relationship theme that runs through that track that could also be describing what King Crimson were getting themselves into, although I think that the mood within the band was a little bit better following the Beat tour. Robert and Adrian had kind of patched things up, and things were rather smooth in that regard. But yeah, the Three of a Perfect Pair album. This is, again, one of my favorites. There are so many great songs on this album, and great King Crimson moments. And it's also one of those kind of classic uneven King Crimson records in the style of Lizard. It's not perfect, but songs like Man with an Open Heart are phenomenal and absolutely stand up to the level of a Waiting Man. Model Man is a great track. Sleepless finds King Crimson experimenting with dance beats and dance music, which is something completely new, but it's also dark and foreboding, and is kind of based around Adrian's bad dreams. He was having a lot of nightmares during the making of this record. It's got Tony Levin's distinctive bass guitar part right up at the forefront, making it an all-time classic. I love, Nuages? That which passes like clouds. It's a nice little, almost David Bowie-esque Berlin album. It's kind of a setup of the right side, the side two, where things get a little bit more hairy. Industry is almost like Mars of the 80s for me, because it's kind of based around that one beat, or even kind of like a bolero form. That's always been one of my favorites. Dig Me is really cool. No Warning is okay, but we round out with Lark's Tongues and Aspic Part 3, which is another worthy. It's not necessarily as good as Part 2, but it certainly is worthy of the name Lark's Tongues and Aspic. I think this is a great album, but what holds this back for me a little bit is the performance. I feel like of the three 80s records, this is the one that is most benefited in the live concert setting, particularly Japan 1984 and Absent Lovers. I think this material really shines live. So, Mike, what's your thoughts on Three of a Perfect Pair?
This album was one I used to really love also. Now I'm a little less hot on it. I do think it's great. I just don't think it's as good as a lot of the other stuff. I think I'm with you with the performance aspect of this record for sure, because it just sounds a little like flatter than the other two albums. And like you said, everything shines live. Whenever they put out a song from this album live, it was hot, like really hot. I wish kind of some of that translated into the record, because like sometimes this record sounds just cold to me on re-listen, and I don't quite know why that is. It's just kind of cold.
They worked with a different engineer on this one. This wasn't Rhett Davies.
Yeah.
And I think also the fact that they spent a year on it, maybe that had an effect.
Time. Yeah, it's like really arduous to make this thing. I will say though, some of my favorite Crimson material is on this record. Like the title track is an incredible piece of music.
Great.
It's one of the best songs in the whole catalog. I love Model Man also. Model Man is, I think, one of the most underrated King Crimson songs. It's just fantastic. And Industry and Dig Me are my other two highlights from this album. Especially live, those things ripped. Like they work as a really good pair. Like Industry is like this, like kind of like a foreboding building up instrumental with a really great like vamp on the drums and bass through most of it. Then it gets crazy into Dig Me, which is a song about a car in a junkyard. And it's awesome. It's this really
from the car's point of view.
Yeah, it's from the car's point of view, which is so cool. It's this really twisted, demented song, and then it has this chorus. To me is like, all of a sudden the sun is shining out. It's just gorgeous piece of pop music out of nowhere. And then it goes back into dementedness. I think it's a really tremendous song. If you want to talk about underrated Crimson, that's the stuff right there.
Oh yeah.
And I like Lark's Tongues 3 also. That one is a grower for me because I used to be just kind of okay about it, but now on re-listen, I was actually really engrossed into it. I was like, oh, this is terrific. And I actually heard a lot of, it's like a good bridge. Like it is the middle, more or less like a middle movement, because like you hear a lot of the part 2, and you also hear a lot of part 4, which comes later on in the catalog. And so it serves as a good bridge for the Lark's Tongues series.
Yeah.
It's a good album. I just think there are a lot of better ones in the catalog, for me anyway.
For me, this is another one of the cinematic ones. Like I would put it in the same category as Lark's Tongues and Aspic, or even the Court of the Crimson King album. It's an album that is an experience.
Yeah.
It's a movie. It's a movie for your ears album. And I would say of the 3 80s albums, it might be the only one that I would describe that way. It's always like between this one and Beat, I think Beat might have it just for the performance, and maybe the songs are a little fresher on Beat. But there's something well-rounded to me about Three of a Perfect Pair that maybe Beat doesn't quite have. So I'm really a big fan of this album. I think this was a strong end to the 80s trilogy. And this is actually my favorite King Crimson band, the quartet. So this one, these 3 albums coupled with the Absent Lovers album, which I think was released in 1998. Those are some of my favorite King Crimson records.